Hello, my name is Scott and I live here in Toronto, Canada. This is video 3 in a 4-video series chronicling my experience with chronic idiopathic urticaria or chronic hives. I've had this condition for over 20 years and I've had the benefit of experimenting a lot. I've done a ton of research. I've seen a lot of different doctors, and I've been able to apply just a lot of trial and error and arrive at a series of things that really work to reliably get me into remission and kind of cure the hives. So looking to share all that. I've got a few slides to show you, so I'm going to share my screen and run through a few things. Now, today I'm continuing the talk. Today I'm talking about what you can do to improve your overall reactivity. As a quick recap, this is me. These are some pictures of my experience with the hives over the last 20 years. I'm a healthy guy. I don't have any allergies or anything like that. This is purely idiopathic hives, i.e. there is no known cause. As you can see, for me, they've been quite severe over the years. I first saw my hives it was in 1997 when I was 24, and they've kind of come and gone ever since, and at times quite severe, as you can see here. So I'm no stranger to it. I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm hoping I can share some of what I've picked up over the years here. The big caveat to all of this, of course, is that I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical professional at all. So take this for what it is. It's essentially one person's experience. And I also show a couple different books and products and so forth in these videos. These aren't organizations or authors that I'm tied to in any way, so there's no commercial relationship there. They're just things that I found helpful, that I thought would be worth sharing. In my earlier video, the first one in this series, called A Framework for Understanding Chronic Hives, I ran through the idea that hives are a function of how much histamine is in your body in general, and then how reactive you are to it. And when the histamine in your body builds up and exceeds the level of sort of like your baseline level of reactivity, that's when you get hives. And overall, to get comfortable and reduce the number of hives that you have, and hopefully cure your hives and get yourself into remission, what you want to do is essentially reduce the histamines in your body, while also improving on your general level of reactivity, so that you can create a gap, essentially, as you see on the chart. And that distance between how reactive you are and how many histamines are in your body in general is sort of the sweet spot. That's where you want to be. That's where you'll experience a big relief in your symptoms. So at least that was the case for me. So I'm essentially sharing my experience, and today's video is all about the things that I did to improve on my reactivity, so I wasn't so reactive to the histamines in my body. So my previous videos, the first one laid out more detail around this framework. The second video talked about what I've done in the past to reduce my histamine level and really get the bottom line on this chart under control and push those histamines levels down. This video is all about what I did to become less reactive in general. And now, thankfully, I'm at a point where I really don't react much at all. I don't take any histamines or really make any diet modifications of any kind, and I'm able to just live my life, like I did for years. And I've been able to get to that state several times. So now when the hives come back, when I see a little sign of them, I go back to these strategies and get myself back to remission. And I find that's something that's very repeatable now. So how did I improve my baseline level of reactivity? Well, it was several factors. one of the biggest things I want to talk about is antihistamines. These are, for most people, are just a huge relief, and these were awesome for me. The ones I had the most luck with are on screen here, and these are not what I would call heavy-duty antihistamines. I took over-the-counter Reactant for years, and it controlled my hives for several years, just taking one extra strength a day. But eventually that Reactant stopped working for me, and I started really getting severe hives, even despite taking it. At another point when I was reactive, it's probably like a decade later, I had an allergist prescribe Blexten, which is specifically indicated for hives, and that was awesome. Again, I had almost maybe a 3.5-year run on that, where one Blexten a day just controlled my hives. But then eventually, much like the Reactant, it just stopped working, and the hives were able to get on top of it, and it didn't work for me anymore. I also wanted to mention organic, or not necessarily organic, I guess, but the nettle leaf tea. That's something that a naturopath turned me on to, and it's a natural antihistamine. And what my naturopath advised was steeping it for 30 minutes. So really getting the most out of that tea bag, and have 3 cups a day. And it was a very effective antihistamine. And it was nice with, if you've seen my earlier video about how I was modifying my diet to stay comfortable, it was really nice just to be able to have some tea, So that was great in and of itself. But these 3 were all effective for me. But the thing with antihistamines, and I've certainly come across lots of people in the Facebook support groups that have had a similar experience where the antihistamines just stop working. There was one thing that really came to light over my time with the hives, and this ran a period of about 24 years where the hives would come and go, and I saw some very distinct patterns, and this one really surprised me, and was absolutely critical to pay attention to get myself into remission. The big caveat with histamines in general is that I found it was actually critical to slowly wean off the antihistamines in order to get into remission. And this is something that right across the board, the doctors I was working with weren't comfortable with, and there was a lot of debate around the antihistamines, but I couldn't ignore the experience that I had personally. So when it comes to adjusting medications, I mean, don't listen to a guy on YouTube. Talk to your doctor. That's really critical. But my experience really was that I had to slowly wean off the histamines, and I can say from my experience, I never would have ever gotten into remission if I'd stayed on them. I'll explain why. You need the antihistamines to get comfortable. I am pro antihistamine. You need those at the beginning to get started, but it's very important to get off of them as well. So many times I would have hives, and then I would be prescribed antihistamines, and over a period of time, they would solve the problem. But in my experience, there would come a time where the hives would kind of catch up. They'd worsen, and despite what the antihistamines I was taking, I would start to get hives again. So it was as if the antihistamines would stop working. I don't know the mechanics of it. That's beyond my training, certainly. But the advice was always to just increase the dose. So I would get the advice to double the dose, and I would do that, and that would work. It would help, but only a little bit, and the doses I was taking, I mean, they were higher and higher and higher, but I was only seeing a little bit of improvement, like just marginal. It would be a slight improvement, or it would be a temporary improvement, and then the hives would just come back. So it was as if the hive activity would rise up to meet the level of antihistamine. So what I would say to myself is, okay, well, taking all those extra antihistamines hasn't really made much of a difference, so I'm going to go back to my original dose. And I did this several times, and every time I did, the hives would just explode. you know, and I had this experience over and over again. So looking back over that pattern, it was very clear that, you know, as much as antihistamines aren't supposed to do that, they're not addictive. They don't have that quality. It's just not in the literature. For me, if hives and antihistamine were increasing, they were kind of doing it together, and it just seemed to be a fact for me. So as hives were rising and I was taking more antihistamines, they just worked in concert. And what I found I had to do was slowly wean off the antihistamines and while simultaneously doing other things to reduce, the reaction that was going on. So I talked earlier about the diet, and I'm going to talk some more about some other things now that I did to reduce my reactivity. But while I was getting things under control, I had to very slowly, very, very slowly reduce my antihistamines. And it was really easy to get this wrong. What I ended up with was a plan where I would just clip little tiny pieces off the pill. And so, and to do that, I would just get like a clean pair, like a fresh pair of like toenail clippers, and just clip tiny little pieces off the pill. I was taking an antihistamine every day typically, so I just shave a little bit off, and I would take that pill down to 3/4, and then down to a half, and then down to a quarter, and then down to nothing. And I would do it so slowly. I was trying to sneak it away so my body wouldn't notice. But each time I did that, my hives would flare up, but they would not stay that way forever. So I had to kind of keep faith. And I mean, again, this was over time. I experimented a lot. So I got to, get repeated runs at this. But yeah, if I clipped down to a new smaller size, I would react, and I'd react for 3 or 4 days, but they would slowly settle down as long as I was doing all the other things, and I'll get to those things in a minute. But I had to trail down the antihistamines as the hives were coming down, and I would have to have faith that I knew I would react, but only for like 4 days, say. And then it would slowly come down. So I would kind of, as they were improving, I would also like clip down the antihistamines to the minimum effective dose and kind of keep doing that. And that for me was a huge part of getting into remission, and always is. It's one of the steps that I repeat, and it really does play a big role. And it's funny when I get to the tail end, I'm taking like a crumb of an antihistamine, and it makes a difference. Like the tiniest little quarter of a pill, and it makes a difference. And when I take it away, I'll react, but only for a few days, and then I'll settle down. So it took some repeated experimentation to have faith in that process. But it was one of the most illuminating things that as far as a pattern that I recognized and stuck to. So it's the number one thing really I would recommend for anybody to try as they're working on other improvement factors. Make sure the histamines or antihistamines come with it. The second thing was around T helper cells. I found a blog about somebody's personal experience that pointed to this, and it led me down a huge hole of research. There's more and more being written about this now, which is interesting. This idea that your Th1 and Th2 helper cells could be out of balance in your immune system. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's written in some of these circles online that doesn't really have a lot of science backing it up. But there are some good research papers out there pointing to an increase in Th2 being associated with hives. So it's worth the research. And in fact, one of the immunologists that I was working with actually had a clinical trial active in his research clinic around a drug that was intended to bring up Th2. Reduce Th2. So it's worth reading into. It's really, really interesting. I've got a couple links here on the slide that I'll include in the description of the video. that you can follow to look some of this up. One of these is an article that was written by Dr. Johan Chikara from Absolute Health and Wellness in Brant, Ontario. It's got a good article about this imbalance and how it can drive some autoimmune problems. He was somebody that I started seeing for this, and he prescribed a series of supplements that I started taking. So everything here on the screen, these were all supplements that were targeted to help sort of bring things back into balance. So vitamin D is associated with that, Guduchi. This T balance is all specifically targeting the T helper cells. Astralagus, there's some evidence around that one. And the zinc copper balance. So these are all things that generally help with that balance. And so I started taking these every day, in the quantities that he recommended. And I have to say, taking these really marked a turning point. I would say there was a real acceleration in my progress with regard to my recovery when I started taking these. And I've had the benefit now of experimenting with these in 2 periods of remission, where these played a big role and really sped things up. So I highly recommend looking into this. Really, really interesting, and it looks like there's some drugs in the pipeline that target these things as well. The next thing is just gut flora, and there is a ton of stuff out there written about hives and gut. 70–80% of your immune system resides in your gut from what I've read. So I mean, it's well worth the research there. Most of the histamine producing mast cells are there. So it's interesting. There's a ton of gut remedies and cures, and I think I explored just about all of them. For me, all the stuff around leaky gut, I pursued it all. I boiled the bone broth, and I did all those gut protocols and so forth. Really didn't seem to do much for me, but I did do a comprehensive stool analysis, and it wasn't cheap. It was a little over $600, but I did that because I wanted an assessment of what was going on in the gut. And I actually did this at a period when I was really reactive. I did that stool analysis. And then once I got into complete remission, and farther along, I think it was a month and a half or 2 months out of remission, I actually invested in doing the stool sample analysis again, because I wanted to see what the differences were. And it was really interesting. Number one, when I was really reactive, I had much lower levels of what they would consider the beneficial bacteria. And that was evidenced in a few different ways in the test. I just had not a lot of good bugs. So that was an issue. I had very low levels of secretory IgA, which you'll have to look up and learn for yourself what that is. As I understand it as a layperson, it's an indicator for the strength of your first line of defense. It's all about the mucous membranes in your body, and there's a first line of defense there as far as your immune system is concerned. Mine was showing indicators that system was not really online. It wasn't really working very well. So one of the theories, of course, was that my body was overcompensating for that, and that's why I was so reactive. That's why I was getting the hives, because the rest of my immune system was just ready to go, because those first line of defenses, those defenses were down. So there was that. These things were both showing while I was really reactive, and both of these things showed huge improvement once I was no longer in a state of chronic hives. So significant improvement. So when I had the second test done, my gut flora was plentiful, lots of beneficial bacteria, and the secretory IgA was no longer abnormally low. It was at normal levels. So I take those as 2 indicators that were at least involved in what was going on. So they definitely are worth mentioning here. Now, what's interesting is, both of these things can be triggered by common elements, like stress or, dietary issues, excessive alcohol intake, body mass loss. Like there's a whole bunch of things, anxiety. It's worth looking into based on my experience anyway. The supplements that my naturopath gave me in response to those tests are shown here on the screen. So vitamin A was specifically targeting the secretory IgA. It was just a compound that helps restore that function, I guess. HMF forte and Saccharol B, those are probiotics, as is histamine X, but that one was interesting. It was more bacteria that are known to produce natural antihistamines. So that would be interesting as well. So that got thrown in the mix. Canabactin was in the mix only because I was showing a parasite. But interestingly for me, the parasite was present in both samples, both when I had the hives and after I had the hives. The Canabactin was specifically targeting that. My levels were about the same before and after, with no effect on the hives. I mean, I'm showing it in my stool now, and I'm completely in remission, not a hive on me. So in my case, the parasites, sorry, just weren't a part of it for me. So this was really interesting, and I think when you consider what they're learning now about the connection between the gut and the immune system, I think this is definitely worth looking into. Contact irritants, these are really interesting for me because I hadn't considered this. I had a patch test done, which is not quite the same as prick testing like they do for allergies. This is where you go in and they put patches on your back in a big pattern, and you have to leave them undisturbed. You can't even shower for like 48 hours. And then you come back and they remove the patches, make some notes, and then you come back again. So the whole process takes, 4 or 5 business days. But what they're looking for is contact allergens. And it actually showed that I had a sensitivity to glutarol, which is used in several types of products and some commercial applications. It's essentially a detergent. I was noticing at the time I was getting close to resolving the hives, but I had really stubborn hives on the back of my thighs and on my butt. And I just seemed to keep getting them there despite having made such great progress on the rest of my hives. I was still getting these collections on my legs. And I thought, well, maybe there's some glutarol in my laundry detergent. They have so many different names for chemicals, as I discovered, that it's this one glutarol goes by like 15 or 20 different names and brand names and so forth that they use in that industry. So to be safe, I just said, well, I'm going to change my laundry detergent altogether and go with an eco-friendly, hypoallergenic laundry detergent. The thing with me is I'm a knowledge worker. I sit in a desk all day, so I am literally pressing on the back of my legs and my butt all day. So I thought it's worth trying. I did this, and wow, did that ever make a difference? Just going to this for laundry really accelerated the pace of improvement. And it wasn't soon after that the hives on my legs cleared up. I don't believe that this is the cause of my hives. I've been able to kind of test afterwards. It's more of an irritant. But with all of this, what you're trying to do is just take anything out of the equation that might be driving your reaction, the reactivity. There's a flywheel of sorts, that just gets spinning. And I felt like it was my job to just slow down the spinning of that wheel. Anything I could do to reduce things, calm things down, and get to the state of kind of homeostasis really made all the difference. There's something really interesting about hives in that having a hive will cause you to have another hive, which will cause you to have another hive. There's something about the mechanism of a hive breaking through that top level of the dermis that it just causes more hives. I don't know whether that's the stress or the itch or the scratching or the mechanism of it breaking through, but whatever it is, one hive causes more hives. And that's well documented. So you can, anything you can do to kind of calm things down just helps overall bring everything under control. So this was a good discovery. Definitely something that I'll keep doing is just washing my clothes with hypoallergenic soap. And then finally, was mind and stress. And this is really related to reactivity, but I'm not going to cover this here because I notice I'm already going long. And this is, I'm going to put this in a separate video because I think of all the things I did, this was probably the most important. So, and there was some really interesting stuff there that I want to share. So I'm going to put this in the next video. This approach, reducing the reactivity, again, just falls into the same framework. What I'm trying to do is reduce histamines and improve that level of reactivity, take that baseline reactivity and bring it up so that I can kind of live in this happy space between the amount of histamines in my body and how reactive I am to them. So this is everything I did. My next video is going to cover everything to do with mind over matter, essentially. There's some really interesting stuff here, and like I said, I think this is where most of my improvement really came from. So that's it for today. Again, take all this with a grain of salt. It's just my own experience and what worked for me. And if you're somebody who's suffering with chronic hives, please just hang in there. Like whatever you can do to dig deep and find that resilience that you need to just keep pressing forward and trying new things and looking for answers for yourself. I hope that you can find that strength to just keep going. I feel you. Good luck. Cheers. Thank you for the time.